beginning of the year, classroom management was something that was difficult for me, an area where I lacked confidence. There would be times when I'd be teaching a lesson and I'd have to pause the lesson in the middle in order to deal with behavioral issues, disruptive, silly, inappropriate behavior from students that were just disrupting the flow of the lesson. And I wanted to find ways to respond to behavioral problems more effectively and efficiently so that less instructional time was being spent on management, so that just the lessons and the days could go more smoothly and we could all get more learning done. So my main research question was, how can I develop and demonstrate a sense of confidence and use effective strategies to elicit student cooperation? I collected a bunch of different types of data to explore this issue. I took videos of myself teaching lessons. I wrote reflections in a teaching journal when there would be this uncooperative behavior that I was seeing in the class. Later I would go and just jot down some notes in my journal, write about the behavior, then write about the strategy that I used to respond to the behavior, the effects on student behavior then after, and just other thoughts and notes I had about the different strategies I was trying out and the different management things going on in the classroom. And I also conducted interviews with experienced teachers about their management styles and strategies. So once I collected the data, I started analyzing it. I analyzed the videos of my lessons by creating a chart just to help see what was going on in these situations. So this is just an example of one row of my chart from my videos. But I included a column per incident just describing the behavior that was going on in the class and the strategy that I used, how I responded to the students. So how did my strategy promote student cooperation? What were the students then doing that indicated they were then cooperating, if they were, or if they continued engaging in that disruptive, silly behavior? I included what they were doing and how my strategy may have inhibited their cooperation, and then just some notes and thoughts on what I might want to do differently next time in a similar situation. So I created a similar chart to analyze my teaching journal. A column for behavior, just describing the behavior that had been going on in the classroom, my strategy, then the students' response, how they responded to my response to them, and then I just wrote down some thoughts and notes on whether I thought that strategy was effective or ineffective and why, and in some cases I just wrote down what situations I thought that strategy might be appropriate or effective to use in. And again, this is just an example of one row from this chart for the teaching journal. So after I had put in all this data into the journals and had these nice big charts, I looked through the charts to see if any main patterns and themes emerged, things that came up a few different times. And so after looking, the first thing that I discovered, which came up a bunch of times throughout my charts, was that it's really important to communicate expectations to students. Students can't cooperate with what I want from them if they don't know what they're supposed to be doing, if it's not clear to them what they are supposed to be doing and what cooperation looks like in this moment. And I read a book called Teach Like a Champion, which supported this idea of the importance of expectations. So in Teach Like a Champion, Doug Lemov talks about this technique called threshold for setting and maintaining high behavioral expectations. And he says that it's really critical to set expectations at the very beginning of the year, of the day, of the lesson, at the outset of the time when you're with students. He calls it this threshold moment, that threshold when the students first enter the room and enter the classroom, that's the time to set the expectations. And I realized that it's really important to set expectations, but the work isn't done after that. I then have to maintain those expectations and reinforce them and hold students accountable to following those expectations. So for example, in my data, in one of my videos, there was, on a quadrilateral lesson, I handed out a sheet to students with a quadrilateral map of the world and asked them to see what quadrilaterals they could find in the sheet. And immediately after I handed out the sheet, students started talking, and the room was getting a little noisy. Students were talking to the other children next to them about the task, about the quadrilaterals that they saw. And in my mind, I wanted to hand out the sheet and then for them to quietly look at it and then raise their hand and wait to be called on when they had something to share. But I realized that I was not clear about these expectations. I didn't really explain to students, right now I'm going to hand out the sheet, please quietly look at it and then raise your hand when you have something to say. And so I don't think it was clear to them that I had wanted them to first look on their own and then share what they noticed. So I found this idea of setting expectations and making sure the students understand the expectations to be really important in a lot of the different situations that I saw in my videos and things that I wrote about in my journal. And also in my interviews that I conducted with other teachers, this idea of setting and maintaining expectations came up a lot as a tool for effective management. So another thing that came up in my charts and journals was the importance of acknowledging and reinforcing positive behavior. There was a point towards the end of the year where my students' behavior had gotten a lot worse at one point, and there were a lot of disruptions and distractions going on, and my mentors and I had brainstormed about different strategies to use to try to promote this student cooperation. And one thing we tried was really emphasizing the positive behavior too, not just the negative, not just giving students attention and pointing out these negative behaviors that we were trying to get away from, but also acknowledging and pointing out these positive, desirable behaviors and encouraging them to continue engaging in these behaviors. So for example, one day during a math lesson, the students were doing independent math work at their desks, and they were all really focused, getting their work done, doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. If they needed help or had a question for a teacher, they would raise their hand and wait to be called on, and the students were really, as a group, cooperating with the expectations and following all of our class norms and rules. And so I just pointed out, I love the way you're all working so quietly right now. And I think just acknowledging that behavior, that positive behavior, is really important. And the students continued to work quietly to follow the expectations, and it was a really productive class. And there were other instances also, which I wrote about in my journal, of times when the students were cooperating, following our class norms and expectations, and I would just point out and acknowledge, just say, I noticed how you all lined up so quietly, and I found that to be effective in promoting and maintaining this student cooperation. So the last thing I found from analyzing my data was that when I'm more engaged and interested and enthusiastic about the material that I'm teaching, my students are more engaged and their behavior is better. So for example, in my unit, which I taught towards the end of the year, in a lesson on making connections to texts of prayers, I was really into it, I was excited, I was interested in the material, I was enthusiastic and animated while I was teaching, and the students were into it. They were eager to participate, they were eager to share their ideas and their connections. They were following with all the class norms and expectations and cooperating. They, were raising their hands and waiting to be called when no one was calling out. They were listening to the speaker and making eye contact and really cooperating with all the expectations, all the behavioral expectations that I had for them. And I really felt like my own engagement rubbed off on them and impacted their engagement, and they were engaged and participated into the lesson, which also impacted their behavior, and all the students were cooperating, and the behavior was really great. It was a really great lesson. So there are a few main takeaways that I'm taking with me from this study. The first is that I discovered some proactive strategies to use to prevent these behavioral problems from even occurring in the first place. Clear expectations, reinforcing positive behavior, and both teacher and student engagement are all tools which I'll take with me next year and into my future teaching, and all just strategies and ways to prevent these disruptive, silly, inappropriate behaviors that I was seeing a lot at the beginning and middle of the year from occurring in the first place. And I think that if I just keep on using these strategies and keeping them in mind, then I'll just set up these situations where the students are more likely to cooperate from the outset. And I also gained more confidence in behavior management throughout the process of conducting this inquiry project. There was this element of confidence in my research question, which I didn't really focus on so much in my study. I was mainly looking at ways to elicit student cooperation in my study. But I found that the confidence piece came through the process of trying out these different strategies, experimenting with strategies, seeing what worked, seeing what didn't work, just through this process of just getting experiences with different ways of responding to students' behavior and seeing the effect. I think my confidence really grew through that, and I did feel my confidence growing in management throughout the year, and even in the videos I watched, I saw towards the end of the year, I just was much more confident. I think that classroom management isn't just about having this repertoire of external strategies to try out and to use, but there's also this piece of my inner stance and the way I'm feeling and my confidence and the way I present myself also definitely plays a part in earning the students' cooperation. So I think the two really do go hand in hand, because as I tried out and got experiences with the different strategies, I felt a lot more confident. And when I felt more confident, the students were more likely to respond positively and to cooperate. So the two really do go hand in hand, and that confidence is something that I will take with me again into my future teaching. So at this point, I would like to take questions and comments.
So Alyssa, sometimes students' misbehavior comes to teach us something. So it sounds like this is an interesting case where you turned a problem into an inquiry, and you turned a problem into a learning advantage for yourself. And I'm curious to know, how did you do that? How did you move from seeing it as a problem? The problem is they're behaving a certain way, seeing it as a feedback loop to help you learn. How did you make that transition?
Well, as I mentioned, like from the beginning of the year, this was something that I noticed as a problem, wanted to work on, and I guess I just started trying different things out from the beginning to see what worked and see what didn't, and obviously the way my students responded to me would impact then, my future strategies or what I thought worked with them, and I guess it was a whole cycle, and obviously I learned a ton from it.
Yeah, it seems like a very positive cycle.
Well, to pick up on that, then I have a question to ask you. It was through, it seemed, I think I heard, please correct me if I'm wrong or explain it, that it was through your research that you recognized the role of teacher confidence in what you were looking at. Is that what you said? That it was when you saw that the more confident you and engaged you were, then it was reflected in your students' behavior? Isn't that what you said?
Yeah, as I was trying out these different strategies and these different management tools, I felt like through that and through that experience, I was then feeling more confident, and then I felt like when I felt more confident, the students were more likely to cooperate with what I wanted from them and to respond more positively to me. So again, there is kind of a cycle, like trying these things out, then getting more confident once I kind of got my feet wet in these different strategies, and then the students would cooperate and behave better once I was more confident.
It made me think of if I was going on a hike, I really want my guide to be confident, and then I might act out more if I sense that that person really didn't know what they were doing and they could get lost. So I think that you're discovering your own role of having confidence, which was naturally occurring because you were practicing, you're in there, played a role in the student behavior. It was a great noticing. And I have a question for you also. So you're talking about clear expectations. How did you assess the clarity of your communication, thinking that students can hear things differently? So how did you define clarity or clear, and how did you understand it when you were creating the directions?
I guess one part of it is being specific, like in the example I gave with the sheet. I just said, look at this sheet, see what quadrilaterals you can find, but I didn't go further and, just explain that they were doing it on their own, not with the person next to them, and then to raise their hand when they're ready for something to share. So I guess just being specific in expectations and in directions, and also just asking the students sometimes to repeat back the expectations to check in and make sure that they're clear on what they're supposed to be doing. Who can remind me how we should be lining up in the hall? Who can remind us what the expectations are for who we work in this class? And just having the students repeat it back to make sure that it's clear to them.